This is the information revolution.
It is.
People have ever heard of the discipline and ever realised that it's a distinct field of research on its own.
I think you're absolutely right, because I mean, when people ask me what I do, if I say I'm an information architect, then I can say that I help with structuring and describing stuff so that people can find it and manage it. But sometimes I think I'm not so much on the information management side. I am more about retrieval in one sense or another. But if you say that to people, information retrieval, they don't know what you mean.
No,
even
interesting.
People will do it every day.
Yeah.
Well, I
love what you were talking about, that you were just starting to say though about the BCS, because the question that's starting to emerge for everybody about Microsoft 365 is, how do I do a BCS in Microsoft 365? That's
the classification scheme, right? Yeah.
I think probably a good principle of information retrieval is that we should use unambiguous language.
Yes, that's extremely good. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
as everyone would agree,
for either the British Computing Society or our loyal and faithful, readers and watchers about how to develop a BCS for Microsoft 365?
Yeah.
I think there's so much that could be said about that one. Yeah, I think you basically have to go back to first principles about why you have a BCS. I reckon you come back to what is it trying to achieve, and ordinarily its primary function is for management, not retrieval, I would say. So primarily it's about being able to, I mean, the techie way of thinking about it is basically trigger workflow off metadata that you've got, which is, the classification scheme. So the most obvious one being, running retention and disposal off that. So basically identifying how long something ought to be kept for, and then what you're going to do with it at the end, set the clock running, all that stuff is normally based on where something sits in a BCS. But there's so many limits to what, what I'd say is that firstly, most people, I think, would agree, most information management types would actually agree that a BCS does not need to be the way that you present information to people who are using it. So that's quite an old idea in EDRMS, that you can restructure information and present it a particular way, and then you map that in the background to your BCS. So your BCS becomes, a taxonomy that's that everyone agrees is just for management purposes, really. And that's definitely not how I've seen a lot of recordsy type people approach SharePoint. I've typically seen that they actually go with, right, I'm going to build my sort of structures that are seen in the system. I'm going to try and apply a function-based BCS to the front end, and so they'll build what would have been site collections, sites, libraries around potentially the kind of classic, what are they, function, activity and
subject,
transaction, or
transaction. Yeah.
And I've had experience with working with SharePoint instances that are structured that way, and I find it really hard. And
why do you find it hard?
Yeah, that's my question too.
Yeah, yep. So I find that I don't know where to put things, and I also don't know where to find stuff necessarily. So I come to, doing contracting and consulting work and coming to different organizations and things. I come to an organization and I can see immediately what the principle is. I understand, functions and activities and so forth. And I get, okay, don't think about the org chart, think about that. But it's just much harder than if I can just find my team space. And I've been normally contracted into a particular unit, project, if it's a project team or a BAU team, whatever it is. And if I can just go to the place where they work, then, that is so much easier for me. And I think, unfortunately, while you can build navigation that fulfills that need, so you could use a SharePoint page and build a view that's like, here's everything the team needs. In the absence of that, and that's what I'm talking about, like if you don't have that at all, and you're just going, right, at the moment I'm thinking about this function of the business, I find it slows me down. I find that, it does make me think. There's that kind of classic adage in web design around don't make me think. I find it makes me think. I'm like, what am I doing here? Is this strategy or policy or procedure, or is this grouped around a core thing that this organization is delivering, or is it about process and procedure and internal policy that relates to how they do that thing? And do they think about the development of those internal policies as a separate function? Because in New Zealand, that would be a separate, record class, the development of internal policy and process. It's separate to the core, core functions of a given public office. So, it really makes me spend time thinking and trying to find things, and I also have no particular confidence that the people I'm working with have the same idea that I do about where they should have saved stuff. So, I mean, unsurprisingly, and just the same as, level playing field is that when you start somewhere, you have to ask people where to put stuff. But I find it takes me longer when I'm thinking about a functional way of grouping things. Yeah. And I could say more, but I'll pause.
Yeah. On the other hand, speaking for the other argument, I find that drives me mad. I mean, I'm thinking about a commercial client that I'm working for, and I have no sense of what they put where because I can't see it. I can't get any context. All I can do is put it in a couple of folders on a site.
Right.
But I don't know what else is going on. And if I'm trying to find it, if I'm trying to get a wider picture of what's happening, there is no way I can do that.
Right,
and I found that others that work there, I mean, I'm just coming in here and there, but others that work there find the same. And you find all kinds of other folders, sites and so on popping up, and you get a link into that one because someone over there has decided, oh yeah, we'll have a special one for this particular team. But actually what they're doing is so related to what this team is doing. It's really mad to have them separate. And I think I've seen a really good example of a BCS, which was developed, a small organization, it's true, less than 200 people, but organized with the business so that everybody understands, well, if I work on this team, this is where all this stuff goes. I mean, admittedly, it was very, how would you put that? I suppose transaction based in that they're giving permissions to do things and evaluating how people are doing things and so on.
Right.
So it's quite clear what the different functions of the business are and therefore where you should put something. And the other thing I wanted to say was, and it works really well, I mean, it was done to support records management, but actually the primary focus of it was how people work and who needs to see what. Mm-hmm. And then we add in the metadata and we add in the labels and so on, so that people can get things in lots of different ways.
Yeah, nice. I suppose, I mean, there are all the classic arguments for having a function-based BCS, and I don't disagree with those. I guess I just am aware of
what sort of classic arguments, just for people who are uninitiated.
Sure. So, I mean, certainly one of the classic arguments is that you shouldn't need to know what part of the organization did something in order to find it. So you don't need to know a team name in order to dig in and get it, so you don't, absolute classic area of changing names is what I'll always call HR. So, like people management, something,
Yeah.
you know, and development.
Culture, personnel.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
And, you know, and that's
Supporting our
always
people.
yeah. And those kinds of things. I mean, and sort of some kind of communications or marketing or stakeholder relations or you know, they're absolute classics where if you had to know the name of the bit of the business that did the work, then that would be a challenge for retrieval, you know, for finding stuff again. And it would be additional administrative overhead if you had to constantly rearrange, well, not constantly, I hope, rearrange the structures of your information based around changes to your org chart. So, you know, if we rename things, what happens? If a team gets split in half, what happens? You know, things like functions and activities ordinarily would be much less likely to change because the functions are based on basically what, in the case of the public sector, you know, or government, like what basically do you have the powers to do is normally what it comes down to, you know, so legal authority to do something, and why do you exist as an organization? And so that stuff definitely is much less subject to change. So in summary, it's supposed to be easier to find things because you don't have to care about the org chart, and it's supposed to be easier to maintain. Yeah, I think it does sound to me like, I mean, the first thing you talked about, Judy, sounded to me like basically using a BCS without necessarily caring too much about what the content is there, but just as a newcomer, being able to look across and actually understand a picture of what the organisation does.
Yes,
just by looking at.
Yes, I think that's extremely useful. Yeah.
So it's basically just looking at the sort of the taxonomy in isolation, if you like. Yeah. So that's really interesting. I hadn't particularly thought about that. I do think another trend in information retrieval being, you know, a focus on search-based technologies. I'm always thinking about that use case where people actually want context, which search doesn't normally, you know, search is not normally the answer when you're trying to say,
yes, exactly. Now that's
tell me the extent of what's there, or tell me the possibilities. You know, search doesn't really help you with that versus I need that document from X, you know, on date Y, where search can often be.
And keyword search, you know, faceted searching and those kinds of things, obviously.
Yeah, so I mean, I think.
Sorry, Judy, go for it.
I was just going to say, just searching, I certainly do need to know the context, or you often need to know the context of what it is I'm finding. And if I haven't found exactly what I want, then I want to know where I am so that I can see what's around me, for example. But another point I wanted to make about BCS is, I think because we think about things in that the old definition of a BCS, which, as Michael says, was very much about retention and disposal, then I think that it's just not a helpful way to think about it at all. I tend to think of BCS these days as in more like your organization navigation, if you see what I mean. So what are those high levels that make sense to the organization? So it's still, in my view, a business classification scheme, but not one whose primary focus is records, record management.
Interesting. And
it's about helping people to find stuff, to get the context, to be able to navigate to places, and to arrange it in whatever containers make sense. That for me is still the BCS. But that's
rather
just
than getting to the, you know, sort of activity level and starting to slice your activities up by the retention period of each particular, you know, sub slice of an activity. Or
well, I mean, the retention and disposal side of it is obviously problematic, but there are so many other ways now to assign your disposal class to documents. Lots of different ways of doing auto classification, some of which I've been involved in. And Microsoft does make it easier for you to set those labels that I think we actually don't need to worry about it in the same way that we used to. There are other ways, you know, it's becoming much more metadata than container.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah. I was when I was when I was first saying about the thing about BCS having a kind of particular use, I guess, yeah, what was on my mind, but I didn't get to because I drifted sideways, was the fact that, as you say, we've just got many tools that you can use at the same time in a modern digital environment. And so the idea that you have to, as you say, use things as kind of use containers for multiple purposes, or even for, a single purpose. I mean, yeah, sort of to some extent there are no containers. I mean, in the sense that, it's just a presentation. It's a way of presenting things. And again, I mean, this has been around in EDRMS for ages. The idea of I think OpenText called them dynamic views, where you can, and views inside SharePoint, where you can just present the same content as a hierarchy of metadata. May as well be a folder tree. That's pretty much what a folder tree is in terms of what an end user's experience of it is. It's just metadata presented as a hierarchy.
Absolutely.
But the point being that once you accept that it's metadata, if you've got the right systems to do it, which lots of systems can, then you're actually able to kind of reshuffle the hierarchy based on different user needs. Judy, I was interested.
Views, by the way, too. I mean, I just think that's one of the best parts about it. Lists and being able to carve them up so that different people see different things depending on the context they need to operate in. It's my favorite feature as someone, relatively new to SharePoint. Yeah,
it's a good time. So, I mean, the classic example, which I think, is useful to say out loud, which I've heard, is thinking about good old case files, where typically the management of case files, you can imagine that if I were a manager overseeing work, I want to see stuff structured around status. I want to see a hierarchy that might put, active cases to the top, and then it might put who's assigned to those cases and then the cases, versus if I'm someone who's working on a case, what do I want to see? I want to see my stuff, so I want to see assigned to me first. And then within that, I might have a breakdown by, probably the sort of the client or the other party to that case file, something like that. And, it's just a really clear and easy example where you can just think of each of those things as basically being metadata applied against groupings of content. And just the modern way of working is that you can just present that in different ways for different purposes, which
absolutely. And for me, the most comfortable way for people to work around that case is probably, not necessarily, but probably to put all of that case stuff into one container with all that beautiful metadata, so that they can just find the stuff that they're working on. They can just see all the most recent cases because the metadata is at the container level. So you sort that way. But for the people who are working on that and having to save information that relates to that case, all they have to do is pop it into that container, whatever that container is, whether it's a folder or a site or whatever. They just pop it in there. They don't have to remember what the fancy code for it is or what the official name for it is. It just goes in there. Now we can all be sure that we've got everything that relates to that case, because that's really important. If I can't find the legal document that relates to this, I'm going to be in trouble. So let's make it as easy as we can for people.
I think like that's such a compelling argument against the idea of a folderless environment. I think. Me too. Yeah. There has been a trend towards saying, well, look, we don't really need to put stuff into containers, which is okay. This kind of idea of a big bucket, and we can use the power of search or browse-based viewing, basically dynamic. I mean, sort of basically like canned searches to find stuff in different ways. And I get all of that. I worry about the stuff about finding context, but as you say, Carl, there's options. There's kind of faceted keyword-based stuff. You can prompt the end user to see a list of possible things, but the actual thing of flagging a bunch of metadata against something consistently, for instance, a case, a project, you know, it's just any kind of piece of work where you know that you want to put a bunch of fields against kind of many objects, so like many Word docs, let's just say many Word docs, you know, the easiest way to do that, as you say, Judy, is to ask someone to, you know, put it in the right folder.
Yeah.
And of course that can go horribly wrong. And of course in the back end, that dragging stuff into a folder might actually just be almost like a workflow that's assigning metadata to a set of objects rather than actually any kind of a physical container. I don't know, scare quotes, because I don't even know what physical container really means. You know, it's like, as far as I know, it's all just, you know, code.
Yeah, it's just metadata, really.
Yeah. But yeah, just
people are just much happier to drag something, much happier, you know, whether it's metadata or not. People seem much happier to drag things into a folder than to assign a piece of metadata.
That's my feeling too.
And
they've got to navigate somewhere anyway.
Exactly.
There are no completely containerless structures. I mean, a containerless structure is generally something like, well, here's our function, our activity, and our subject, and now we have a containerless, you know, something.
Right. It's
like shared drives now, you know, it just looks like shared drives.
Yeah. But it's funny how many people will very happily go down 3 levels of a tree, and then you ask them to put one piece of metadata on and they won't do it. But if you gave them an extra level of folder, they would just very happily drop it in there because that makes sense to them and they feel like it will help them find it later. Whereas, I don't know, there seems to be an odd association thing psychologically that goes on with metadata. I don't know what it is, whether people just feel like the pop-up. I think because it happens after the work, I think that, and I'm sure somebody actually researched this, but you know, you kind of do the work of dragging the thing in and then this next thing happens and people feel like the task should be over or something.
Interesting.
I feel like there's got to be something psychological there, but I mean, there's lots of research in marketing that basically says that, you know, the more you try and capture from someone, the lower your rate of success is, which I've really looked hard for in you know, the records as well, and not found.
I've seen systems where you can't even start your document without filling in some very basic metadata, and that seems like quite a good idea.
I mean, we're not just randomly running around, you know, creating stuff because we felt like it. You know, there has to be an underlying purpose. So why not just lock in at the start? I'm creating this Word document for a case I'm working on, you know.
But I think even then, you know, like if I were to get a screen that basically got me to pick my recent folders, again, whether or not they're really there or whether it's just a view that I get, and you know, that would be easier for me than thinking about even typing a case name or whatever. So it's, I mean, there's a lot, I think it's just about presentation of metadata so that people don't think they're filling in forms. I don't know.
I mean, the best organisations I've seen are the ones who have got business systems that are integrated to record systems. And, you know, there's a fundamental underlying belief that I've got that, you know, records management is, we do it because we have stuff to manage and we need to understand, you know, status of those things, or we need information that we got at some point in the past to inform a decision we need to make now. And I think that's something that, I think there's a lot of records management that's been done looking backwards. And I think the thing about business systems is that they're generally built with the idea that we have to manage work we are doing now. And I think I think there's a critical psychological piece there that, I mean, I think lots of record system vendors could really learn something from. I mean, ultimately, I think, you know, the future of record systems is really, I think it's business systems.
I agree.
I don't think ISO 15489 and 16175 are enough of a hurdle that at some point in the future, you know, SAP won't just do it and Salesforce won't just do it and those sorts of things. And then, you know, you have an object store and you have your business data as well, and it all just together.
I used to work for an organization that, you know, sold Salesforce, and you could already configure all kinds of rules to, you know, protect the integrity of metadata, to, you know, put permissioning around files that are uploaded into it, you know, or hang a document management bucket off the back, integrated with a lot of different platforms. So I could easily see that coming. And I certainly, I mean, I quite routinely say that often the most significant records of government from a general layperson's perspective are typically stored in business systems. So that feels like a slight disclaimer there, but you know, things that basically say, what do I owe the government, or you know, what sort of duties and obligations am I under? So a classic one would be, you know, taxes and fines and those kinds of things, or what am I entitled to that the government's managing on my behalf? So, you know, citizenship, land records, you know, passports, like all those kinds of things. Like, there's no way that stuff is document based nowadays. You know, those things are in business systems that are built to manage a process from start to finish. And sure, there may be documents involved in that, but I would say that almost always
representations.
You know, birth deaths, you know, birth deaths and marriages, as it's called in New Zealand, you know, like those fundamental entitlement tracking things or obligations is the flip side. You know, it's data, and it's not, there is no record object normally, which I think is a challenge to the concept of records as it's traditionally been defined as the kind of, you know, the combo of metadata and object.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting times, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there is interesting work being done there as well. You know, there's a great set of articles that his surname is Yo, and I've just forgotten his first name, but he did a couple of great papers about 10 years ago, about 15 years ago now probably, about records as representations that I really took a lot from. And actually, Chris, I'm really struggling with names today. He manages information management, and actually I think he's more senior than that now at APRA, which is the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority in Australia. He wrote his PhD thesis, finally finished it about 18 months ago, and it's all about records as process. And you know, there's a generally interesting idea there. That I think is worth a lot of people paying attention to. But you know, how does the profession? We've been on artifact, and then you know, artifact as a representation of something that happened for so long that how do we move forward on that? And I think as a profession, you know, there's another great book that's called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and basically what it says is that scientists and physicists in particular, I think, is the group that they really zero in on. They don't change their minds about the fundamental theories that they understand. What happens is that one group dies and the next group actually just grows up knowing the new thing. And I know that's a little bit hard, but I wonder whether we're in the same. I wonder whether we're in the same boat at the moment. You know, whether there's a group of people who, you know, have just grown up on a specific paradigm of records management. And because change is really, really, really hard, particularly when it's that fundamental change, you know, are we waiting for, you know, is it going to take a group retiring before we start to move this definition of a record on, you know, from what it is at the moment, where it's really stuck in the EDRMS world with objects, you know, artifacts that we can manage rather than.
But I think one thing I would say about a traditional view of records definitely covers off the concept of sort of aggregation or collection, or you know, like
I was just going to get onto that.
So you know, so you do manage stuff as groups, right? And I wonder whether we've almost gone in a little bit of a you know, sort of almost a sort of a dip or a dumbness in our thinking, where we took physical paradigms based around the file in the sense of the folder, you know, the kind of collection. We went, cool, this is analogous to a container inside an electronic system, and we put documents into that. We're going into this, we're in a phase of managing each document or each item. Like there's, you know, a bunch of systems now apply record rules at that level. All kinds of complications in that, and it doesn't particularly make sense to me. But I wonder if what will fall out the other end of that is that kind of idea that, oh yeah, we actually always had this the concept of aggregations and we've been too sort of literally minded in terms of trying to find those things in our systems rather than trying to just
link them all together,
accept that they're business concepts, you know, like, and that it's just we can just agree at any time that this thing is an aggregation, and we can come up with the technical criteria that meet that definition. It doesn't have to be in the system, I guess.
It's like the way projects are managed according to the retention and disposal schedules in New Zealand. They're not, actually. Financial records are managed in this way, and you know, the ones relating to a computer system are managed in that way. And so you've got all this stuff relating to a project, and you have to kind of, in theory, pull it apart in order to abide by your whole retention and disposal schedule, which is nuts.
It is nuts.
It's absolutely nuts.
Records, people tie themselves in knots more over projects, I think, than practically anything else. They're my favourite example. But I mean, they're the ultimate cross-functional team, and that's the thing. You know, when you were talking at the start about some aspect of what we're doing, I made a note here to talk about cross-functional teams, because I think that's a real, you know, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that we used to have something that could cross functions and cross business units and come back, and it was a file. You know, if you're doing a recruitment process, well, you know, the person in, you know, the person in the business unit manager probably kicks off the recruitment process by writing some kind of rec for it. And then that goes to HR, and it probably goes in a file, and then the file comes back with some candidates, and the file circulates.
And one of my favourite bits of old metadata is, so where is this file supposed to live, and where is it now?
But see, there's something interesting there.
Is it in the toilet block?
Exactly. Yeah. Or
the shower block.
Desk, you know?
Oh, the shower block. Yeah.
It was both. I think though. So that's one of the things that I wanted to zero in on though too, because for me, there's two things one of the things that's kept coming up is, just some of this stuff that we've dragged through from legacy record keeping. And one of the things that's really interesting about some of the terminology I think we use is that we still use custodian.
Oh, right.
I keep seeing that pop up all over the place, yet there is absolutely zero concept of, you know, you can't have custody of an electronic record. It's just a nonsensical idea.
Yeah,
but it keeps popping up, and where it keeps popping up that's really interesting is I keep seeing it pop up in information asset registers. People want to put custodian in there. They don't want to say owner. Yet to me, what we're actually talking about with these cross-functional teams is that there is an ambiguity of the ownership of that record and who needs to own that. You know,
I think.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think HR records, you know, HR need to own those. If they're recruiting someone, we have a function an activity in the organisation, which is recruiting. And you know what? The record should be owned by the recruiting team. But what does that mean for, you know, business unit manager who is also told you must keep records because you're part of the public service? You know, do they keep them over there? Do they keep them in here? How do we make that easy so that it doesn't just go on a folder on their desktop that says, you know, recruiting Joe or, you know, recruiting whatever?
I mean, I've no idea what that paper about, you know, records as a process says, but I just think, well, you know, there's a process and you provide access to the process, you know, and so that might end up in a modern environment. That might be a workflow in a recruitment system, you know, and you just provide access to the right people and they have roles in your assigned workflow. So it's not even, I mean, I can see sort of direct ways of translating that idea of shifting a file around that should be even more efficient nowadays, but it's just not.
I've moved ownership.
I guess what worries me, one of many things that, you know, I shouldn't let keep me up at night is that this kind of engagement in business processes and in how people work and helping people to do the work well. Like, to me, that seems like a really important aspect of managing information and records. Like, you know, it's going out there and helping people. And that necessarily, I think nowadays involves understanding at least some level what business systems are out there and how people use them and what processes they're doing using those systems. And ideally being obviously involved, you know, deeply in the design of those systems. And it worries me when I encounter people who are much more just focused on, for instance, their EDRMS or whatever, their, you know, how well structured is my bucket of records. Because again, you know, I worry that the most important records are not actually in their purview, as it were. Is that a fancy word for a Friday?
I mean, you are, that's a consistent theme for me. It's one of the reasons that, you know, I just think Microsoft 365 is an amazing opportunity for most people in records, because for the first time ever, we can really get control of creation in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the things that frustrates me so much is that I do see lots of agencies out there who have got a 10 to 20% capture rate of records who are saying we can't use Microsoft 365. And so essentially it's kind of like there is a drop off, you know, it's like we're creating 80 to 90% of our stuff over here and we're capturing 20 over here. So, you know, we have a 60 to 70% drop off at some point, you know, a loss of information and records at some point.
Where is this stuff going?
Yeah.
I mean, file servers are the number one culprit, but
yeah,
you know, I've, you know, that idea that one of the other things that, you know, keeps getting,
oh my gosh, we won't be compliant when in fact we're not compliant at all right now.
That's it. I mean, and we're mostly non-compliant. You know, that's the thing that, you know, it's got to be a more mature, you know, approach to that idea. And, you know, at some point it's got to encompass business systems. And I think that's one of the things about, you know, we do talk about the aggregation a lot in records. But I think what we talk about is a really weak aggregation, because most of the time it doesn't include the business system. You know, it's like it doesn't exist.
And that's where your information architecture comes in, that would really acknowledge all of that, would understand what's where and why it's there and how it fits together and what should be there, and etc. Yeah.
To me it feels like, you know, it's obvious that you want to understand, you know, I guess it's coming back to the BCS, the idea of like, what is it we do, and how do we think about what we do, what tools have we got, or what buckets of stuff do we have, you know, and then the kind of rules layer about, you know, retention and disposal and so forth.
Not just how we think about what we do, how we do what we do. That's the, you know, that's the thing. And like you said, I love the example you gave before, that, you know, managers want to see, you know, a status oriented view of things.
Yeah.
Because I mean, realistically, managers want to see an aggregated status view of things.
Yeah.
Whereas what, you know, frontline people want to actually see is a current status view of things on an individual basis. And I feel like we need a better maturity model for records management. And I think that idea is actually the one that I keep coming back to when I keep thinking about what it could look like. You know, it's maturity level 0 is that, you know, you've just got your stuff and it's in buckets and you can find it. You know, maturity level 2 is that you can get, you know, cross-sectional information about things. You know, maturity level 3 is, you know, you can get something else. And I don't know what that looks like, but I keep coming back to that idea that, you know, the purpose, you know, and this is why I'm banging on about the DICAR model at the moment. You know, the point is to achieve all these results we're looking for. Well, you know, one of the results that organisations are always trying to get to is a better managed organisation. You know, better strategic decision making. You know, better strategy. Well, I mean, how do we make records the discipline that they go to? Because at the moment, if you go to a records team, it's fantastic. They can drown you in information. You know, if you were the chief executive and you wanted to, you know, learn about past cases that, you know, the organisation had managed and find all the information, well, you go to the records team and you could spend 10 years learning about that stuff, and the pile would actually be getting big that you hadn't read would actually be getting bigger while you're doing it. But that's not useful. So how do we make records the place that you go to so that, you know, you start to get those aggregated views of information? And, you know, I hate that there's a little part of me that hates that I keep coming back to Microsoft with all this stuff, but they're starting to make it really easy. You know, some of the metadata stuff that you can do with Word documents and those kinds of things. And then you can, you know, document sets rolled up to, you know, Power BI reports at different levels. That to me, there's a dream there that is records management as, you know, the real feeder of decisions and everything else in the organisation. And I don't see most groups talking about it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
interesting.
kind of think that the information management team ought to be sitting within the business analytics team, if there was such a thing.
Yeah.
In that organisation.
Business analytics team totally sitting in the information management team.
Yeah.
I've seen that more than once
Right.
in NZ, in Wellington. Yeah, or maybe not, or sitting together with, some kind of appreciation of a combo of sort of, whether you call it insights or BI or whatever, some understanding that there must be a foundational thing where you're getting creating and maintaining records, as they would say in the PRA here. And Carl, you've talked before about quality. It's also that. It's like some kind of understanding of getting the quality of things to the point that we can then report on it accurately, so that the sort of sister team can then do their bit.
And I love that you hit that, because that's what I actually, every time I think about it, it's different quality aspects. And, we have to, that's the thing we have to do. We have to have a better conversation about the quality of records and what it actually means for the results that we can produce.
Yeah.
Because handwritten records proceed at a certain speed in the organisation, Typewritten records or, electronic text proceeds at a certain level, and you can do certain levels of automation with it. Structured data proceeds at a certain speed. I think there's a fundamental qualitative difference there. But
and
meaningful.
We've said it before, the ISO standards and things, or just talking about records has not necessarily, it's not strong on that stuff. It's not hot on that sort of dimension.
It's kind of a victim of everybody else's quality decisions. And I feel like we need to become less a victim and more a driver of, no, let's stop doing it like that. Business, you are not custodian.
Where people are, up to sort of talking about information governance and actually talking about information governance rather than just renaming IMIG, they typically will bring in those kind of concepts. So to me, part of that thing where you're not just relabeling records management is that you're thinking about what information do we need, as opposed to what do we happen to create at the moment. And you're thinking about the quality of that information, so how ought that be structured? IA.
And we've just performed a nice big circle back to where we started, which was information retrieval, BCS, information.
Yep.
And that's actually probably where we should stop, because I know, Michael, you are just about out of time. I'm just about out of time. And I feel like we have limited numbers of rabbit holes. Unless, Judy, you had a final comment to make. Maybe you could give us our final point of the day.
No, I don't think so. Damn, I can't think of anything really super, key to get in there. But metadata, that's the
yes.
Metadata's
I'll throw in one more thing that was on my mind earlier. Carl, you mentioned document sets, which is just as an idea in 365. In Microsoft SharePoint in general, where you could put metadata against a container. So a document set is like a folder, but unlike a folder, you can say like case start and end date, the organizations involved, whatever. You make up your own fields, put it against a container of things. And so management folks love it as an idea. It still exists in 365, although I kind of don't hear Microsoft talk about it, but it's still there. But I also have heard many times from people that because it doesn't look exactly like a little yellow folder icon, that impacts the way that end users work with them and interact with them. And I find that really interesting, and just wanted to bring it up because it's a concrete example of the kind of thing you were saying, Carl, where there's something psychological going on about the interface and the way that I see how stuff's been represented to me. So even just the fact document sets have a different icon messes up people's idea of how they want to file, basically, how they want to save stuff. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, it did just, and I'm just going to open one of my other devices because there were, I think there's a great quote there that we can finish on, which is, and it's just funny, I just happened to have this open the other day. There's a guy named Alfred North Whitehead, and it's a great book on psychology written in the 1920s. But one of the things he says is that civilization advances by extending the number of important operations we can perform without thinking of them.
Okay. That
Cool.
makes sense.
And
Yeah,
adding metadata to your record is an important operation, and that's
Yeah,
what
yeah.
we're trying to do. This is how we advance civilization through records management today. We figure out how to add metadata without making people do something.
Love it.
We've already got that. We've already nailed that.
we've already got that. But
We
yeah,
do got it,
but
but we just don't. How often does it actually get used, and how often does it get used well?
yeah, that's a very good question. We could come back to that on another
We could
talk.
come back to that. That's probably a good thing to start the next one on.
Nice.
Right.
Fantastic.